It is perhaps a rather bold statement, but I truly believe that for any given person, there are only a handful of video games that will truly resonate with them throughout the course of their life, maybe 4 or 5 at most. There are, of course, plenty of games you may find yourself enjoying, but only those select few will find their place in your heart, worming their way through your thoughts for all time to come. I say this because the game we will be looking at today is one such example for me, and that is Fire Emblem Awakening. A turn-based tactical RPG released by Intelligent Systems for the Nintendo 3DS in 2012, Awakening is heralded by many in the community as the savior of its franchise, as it was intended to be the last hurrah for a dying series. However, its monumental success led to new life being breathed into the series, and it stands today as a hallmark title among other Nintendo classics, much to the chagrin of many Smash Bros. Fans. The game sees you commanding units in an ever-expanding army across a number of battles and skirmishes throughout the game's many chapters, as you get swept up in an epic tale that will determine the fate of the fictional continent of Ulysse. It's one part tactical RPG and one part visual novel, and the colorful cast of characters that you encounter and connect with throughout the story serve as soldiers in your army, each with their own classes, strengths, and weaknesses. Even though certain units may be more powerful than others, many players will ultimately gravitate towards the characters that resonate with them to use as mainstays in their roster. You take control of the character known as Robin, or whatever odd name you choose to give them, who wakes with amnesia and finds themselves the tactician of the Shepherds, a group of soldiers led by the prince and princess of the realm, dedicated to protecting the small folk. It quickly becomes apparent that dark times plague the land, as monsters begin appearing alongside the rise of a fanatical cult, and the appearance of a mysterious masked swordsman sends the shepherds down the path to saving the realm, and discovering just how Robin is connected to everything. With all of this in mind, our discussion today will focus on the MDA framework to analyze key aspects of the game, particularly how its core gameplay elements influence the way the player is emotionally invested in the narrative and characters. When discussing mechanics of a strategy game, it's curious to consider how, in this game, you only really have a handful of unique actions you can take in the middle of a level. For each unit, the player can move them, choose to attack a nearby opponent, or wait in place. In specific situations, you also have the option to have certain characters talk to others, and this is typically done between characters that know each other to produce unique dialogue or when recruiting new units. Ultimately, however, the actual turn-by-turn gameplay consists of a combination of those first 3 actions for each unit in the player's army: move, attack, and wait. The enemy's army then takes their turn, which consists of the same actions and following the same rules, and this repeats until the chapter's objective is achieved or the player is defeated. This surface-level simplicity even extends to the actual combat that occurs when a unit is made to attack another. When you consider something like Pokemon, for example, the damage formula is extensively complicated to the point of appearing like a math equation you haven't had to use since high school. In Fire Emblem, however, the damage formula is as follows: your attack minus the opponent's defense equals the damage dealt. It's literally just basic subtraction. However, there is an element of variance, as each attack has a chance to miss and a chance to deal triple damage, or crit, and this lends an element of variance and unpredictability to nearly every individual combat encounter. And one of the most well-known aspects of Fire Emblem's core gameplay is the permadeath. Just as it sounds, if one of your units were to die during combat, you've lost them permanently. For the purposes of both gameplay and story, with the exception of plot-relevant characters, that character is just dead now. This permadeath is optional, but it is often seen by much of the community as the intended way to play the game, as it forces the player to consider the consequences of every single action they take. Outside of the chapter-based gameplay, each unit in your army exists as an individual character that can grow and level up as they acquire experience, and each one has their own growth rates, which are a percentage number that determines how likely an individual stat is to increase upon a level up. Naturally, this RNG factor means there is a large degree of variance between not just each unit, but different instances of a unit across different players and multiple playthroughs. We'll return to this in a bit. Now, all of this discussion on simplicity might have you wondering what kind of strategy can exist in the game at all. But indeed, as we turn our attention now towards the dynamics of the game, I believe it'll become more evident. Perhaps the most pertinent thing that comes to mind when talking about Fire Emblem's emergent gameplay is the most common sentiment that arises when the game is mentioned in the general gaming community, and that is anime chess. If you were to take a chessboard and turn all of the pieces into anime characters, that is what Fire Emblem is at its core. This is, of course, a simplified description, but not an inaccurate one. And I want to focus on the chess aspect of that description for this segment, because chess is a very interesting case study when discussing the matter of a game's dynamics or emergent gameplay. Consider the mechanics of chess and how, on a surface level, they are as simple as can be. There are 6 unique pieces which can each move in their own ways, and that's it. Each player has access to the same options each turn, but a single move changes the board state almost entirely. And from there, things spiral endlessly and every game is different from the last. This is why, despite its seemingly simple mechanics, chess has not changed for centuries, and yet continues to be studied and theorized about today. This same principle applies to Fire Emblem. Because of the nature of how the game works, despite the limited quantity of unique actions that can be taken each turn, the various and limitless combinations of those actions expand and change every time an action is taken. This is further expanded by the fact that each level presents a different map, a different set of enemies that you have to face, a different objective that you have to achieve, etc. And that's only describing the variables that the game itself presents. On the player side, variation exists in even more ways, down to what units you bring, what kind of equipment you've given them, which units you've decided to invest resources into, and how much you've leveled them up. And then you remember what we mentioned earlier about growth rates, and how variation exists down to the smallest denomination of the game, where even a single unit can vary from player to player, playthrough to playthrough. As you can see, despite the fact that there are only really 3 unique actions that both the player and the enemy can take, the various ways these actions can be taken will inevitably spiral, and even if you were to reset and perform the exact same actions, the various elements of RNG present throughout the systems ensures endless variance. And I believe that this is the clearest example of how simple mechanics can still lead to incredibly emergent gameplay. And all of this variance is intended, not just to keep the gameplay experience interesting and exciting, but also because it's meant to represent the inherently chaotic nature of war and combat. As mentioned earlier, you, as the player, play the role of this army's tactician. You dictate what your soldiers do, how they fight, what weapons they train with, and even who they fall in love with. I'm not joking. Something that I've yet to mention is one of the features that Awakening introduced to the series, that being the ability for characters to develop their relationships as they fight alongside each other, and for the children that they create, for lack of a better word, to be added to the ranks of your army. Don't think about that too much, I swear it makes sense in the context of the story. It has to do with time travel, if you're curious. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the game puts great effort into ensuring cohesion between your gameplay decisions, or the dynamics, and your emotional attachment to the story and characters, every soldier in your army. If you find that 2 units complement each other's weaknesses, and thus pair them together often during battle, you might be interested in having them smooch and making a kid. Thus, you have an emotional investment in the relationship between those 2 characters because you use them together during gameplay. This could work the other way around as well, and you might pair units together in combat because you think their characters go well together and you want to develop their relationship. Just this one aspect of the game mechanics has such a large effect on its aesthetics and players' emotional investment in the characters that it has remained a staple of the franchise from this game onwards. And there are more examples of this ludonarrative cohesion present throughout the game, particularly something we mentioned earlier: permadeath. Losing a unit doesn't just mean losing some faceless soldier in your army, you're losing a character. That character is dead now, and unless they're vital to the plot, they will not appear in the story and cutscenes, and you can't develop their relationship with other characters anymore. They are gone, not just in the sense that you can't use them in battle anymore, but also in the sense that they're no longer in this mortal realm. And so, the drastic nature of permadeath naturally influences every player's decision-making, and you might see yourself not making certain decisions, even if they would be tactically beneficial in the moment, solely because they would put a character at risk, one that you're emotionally invested in. Not only does this kind of decision-making make sense for you, the player, but also for Robin, the tactician of the army. Both you and the character that you embody have a vested interest in ensuring the survival of as many of your soldiers as possible, for both tactical and emotional reasons. And that is, in my mind, such a good example of the way the game's dynamics influence its aesthetics. Overall, you might have been able to tell that I am deeply fond of this game, not just because it's made a big impact on me as a person, but also because I do genuinely think that it is a mastercraft at what it's able to achieve, using, quite frankly, very simple mechanics. And I think that is the primary takeaway in regards to its relationship to our own prototype. Seeing how Fire Emblem Awakening is able to leverage limited options to create endless gameplay possibilities will hopefully influence our own ability to do something similar. It might be possible, for example, to have the acquisition of certain food power-ups lead to things that the player could not achieve before, not just in the immediate mechanical sense, but also in the way the player might choose to make other decisions. Additionally, while I've neglected to mention it thus far, another reason I chose this game was due to the top-down and sprite-based nature of its map and characters during the tactical segments of gameplay, which is roughly similar to some segments of our game. Viewing these creative visual elements will hopefully provide a useful framework for me going forward. And that's all I have for you today. Like and subscribe, I guess. I don't know. So yeah.